Bob, you just briefly touched upon some of the massive changes that have happened in 2020, uh, along with delivery services saving national postal services and UPS, FedEx going crazy. Let's open up a crystal ball if we can look forward to 2021 and beyond, and maybe just give us a riff on where you see the car business going.
Well, that's a pretty broad brush, and you're talking to a non-pontificator, because there's nothing worse than a pontificator, right? Somebody that actually acts like they got a crystal ball, they know what's going on. The only thing we can be is participators, and I guess understand how it's affecting us in different directions, right? So these things, as they add up, one on top of the other, not to be a pessimist, because the last thing in the world I am is a pessimist. Everything is always half full, but it's unbelievable. So we got titles and checks and cars and things that are getting backed up with something that it's complete. It's almost like a sucker punch coming from nowhere, right? It just adds on top of testing your ability to balance. Like left hooks and right uppercuts that you didn't see coming. Typically, the ones that knock you out, right? And it continues to be one on top of the other. And it seems like there's two ways to look at this: half full, half empty, of course, right? But on one side, the vast majority of people, used car dealer, new car dealer, people in the middle, have had record years. We learned how to do things with fewer people, more multitasking, not driving, glued to a computer, talking nice to people that you never saw before on a computer. In other words, all the things that you do with social media, right? It's all like it's changed everybody's behavior. The vast majority of it in the car business is actually turning out to be positive, but it's as if these unseen blows keep coming from different directions, right? So you can't get things paid off. If you can get them paid off, they can't find a title. When they can't find a title, you wind up with all kinds of things because you did everything right. You bought and sold something, whether it's wholesale or retail, and you really can't get a deal put to bed because of these ancillary, really, truly insane circumstances, and you can't even get mad at people for it. How are you going to get mad at UPS because they didn't deliver, 340 checks that you sent out with them? Because they all got piled up in a warehouse someplace. They couldn't do nothing because COVID hit them, right? Now that's I would call that like a blow behind your head, because you couldn't see that one coming, because you're assuming the infrastructure is going to work the way it's supposed to work, right? There's no way in the world like crazy things are going to happen, like once in 4th century type of things are going to happen, one on top of the next. So believe me when I tell you, I can't pontificate to understand what's going to happen. I can only, and can't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it, because if you did, you could be like a deer frozen in the headlights, worrying about what's coming next, right? In the meantime, still doing business a little bit differently, but doing business like it's everything's fine in the world, right? So. I was just saying earlier that here comes another recall on 1 million cars, right? It's no big deal, but now picture that, the pressure that puts on all sorts of things in between, right? It's could be an issue with service departments getting backed up a little further, so you can't get cars ready to get them sold, et cetera. So there's all sorts of things that keep on piling on, right? Everybody's whining they can't find techs, right? Now you got cleanup shops and body shops that are shutting down because one person caught the thing. So what you take for granted, the things that you've always taken for granted, of course I can buy something today and get it ready tomorrow with no problem whatsoever, because the machinery is in place where it's just assumed. It becomes part of the carpet. You don't worry about the carpet once it's down. You just walk on it. It's like something that's there. You don't have to think about it again. But then when the carpet's not there any longer, right? It changes the texture of the circumstances. It's not the same, right? If you got, let's say in our case we got, let's say 15 body shops that basically are they're subcontractors, but they're not because they're only doing our work. And 2 or 3 of the guys that you're really leaning on have one person out for whatever, the disease, right? All of a sudden, those 32 cars aren't getting done. Now, what's that do? It backs everything up. So that's our case of what we do. But it's just very similar with anybody that's buying and selling stuff. It's with transportation. It's with, we're really hoping that we don't get shut down with, auctions again. But how in the world could it not be that way if we keep on the path that we're going on? So we'd love to ignore it and just keep assuming that everything's going to keep floating away the way it is. It's not like we're going to stop and again, get frozen in the headlights with it, right? But it's like it's a circumstance that it keeps you on edge. Let's put it like that. In other words, your edge is on. Your edge is on there, but it's also on with all the other things that we see that are coming to market to be the asymmetrical solutions of different things, right? The digital retail possibilities and the flood of all of those capacities, because we know that we're going to be doing things differently in the future. So nobody wants to miss the boat. Everybody wants to get on and do whatever they're supposed to be doing. From a sourcing standpoint and from a disposition standpoint, what's the best thing that's working? Well, nothing's really showed up to say this is the way that it's going to be the dominating platform. So as we want something new to be the best way to do it, it turns out that it's not. And if you're putting all your marbles in that particular basket, right? It's not going to work out, because sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes one thing's good and nothing's bad. What that really means is we just stirred up the soup a little bit further, because that means you really can't just go in one direction and assume it's the right thing to do. In our case, what we found is other alternative ways of doing things are not necessarily, in fact, they're definitely not better than what we've been doing. Consistency, depth, in other words, speed. Let's say. The ability to turn anything in a minute, all of that stuff. You can pick out one item here or there that might be better someplace else, but we find that it's really not a better alternative. That doesn't mean that a better alternative won't show up. It's not going to be that way. But simultaneously, what's it mean when you have all these other asymmetrical ingredients getting thrown at you, right? When you have, and you can't predict, uncertainty is what causes wars, right? Lack of communication and uncertainty, right? You can't really get your feet solid on the ground to know what way you're going to be going and say, let's do it faster and harder and more and all the rest of it. You can't do it if the fragileness of those items that we're talking about that they're taken for granted aren't necessarily something that you can, just close your eyes and know it's going to be that way. It's kind of a weird circumstance. It's not bad, but it just doesn't let you take a deep breath and say, I think I got this under control. Keeps an edge on that, is, I guess it's what gets you up early and lets you go to bed late. And in between, it's like a blink of an eye and the day is gone, right? Because you got to do what you're doing, but you got to simultaneously keep your eye on everything else that's around you, and then hope that the taken for granted items don't get yanked out from under that carpet. Don't get pulled out from underneath you. You follow me? I don't know if that makes any sense, but just thinking about it, and when you're saying, what's going to happen, if any knucklehead starts predicting that whatever used to be is going to be, that's a complete and absolute fallacious concept. It's not going to be that way. It's not going to be that way with anything that we're doing. None of it's going to be like solid in the way it's just going to be. The whole concept of how you buy and sell stuff, it's not going to be that way. The idea that you're going to be taught to sell something for less out of fear from somebody else, it's not going to be that way. It can't sustain itself, particularly in the circumstances, right? So, the idea that one platform is going to be the winner of anything that we do, it's just not going to be the case. The rainbow of different needs of all different categories of dealers, it dictates that there has to be I would call it a commonsensical, universal. Uh, I hate to use the word agnostic, but especially on Christmas Eve, in other words, but agnostic set of solutions that is going to let people have the capability of communicating with buyers and sellers, wholesale and retail, to be able to because it's not face to face. Even if it's face to face, it really isn't face to face because it's not going to be face to face. It's always going to be like leaning on whatever else is there to assist in the process. Depending on, it could be 10%, it could be 80%, it could be 110%, depending on what it is and what you're talking about. But it's all going to be leaning on something that is not necessarily clearly the dominant platform at the moment. Does that make any sense to you, Shawnee?
Well, I like that, the part that, taking different parts of, these dealerships' operations for granted until something happens. Just like you said, once you have the carpet installed, you're just keep walking on it. One of the things that jumped out at me in the last little while is the OEMs kind of hopping on board with creating their own retail marketplaces for used vehicles. So I saw Ford's going to be rolling out a marketplace, nationwide, where that's basically going to list all their dealerships, from what I understand, all their dealerships retail pieces. And there's another OEM that's going to be launching their own. And have you ever seen that before? I know.
Yeah, we did actually in the year 2000, Sean. I remember it distinctly. In 2000 at the NADA convention, it was like going forward where, the OEMs were going to eliminate the dealer. And the only thing that was going to stop them from doing that was the ability to trade a car. The trade really was the element that would stop dealers from being excluded, just basically being service and delivery centers, because the OEM would be selling the cars from like a Tesla type circumstance. Obviously, there was no such thing as Tesla in 2000, but that really was that was like the top topic at the 2000 NADA convention. And of course, all dealers said, that's never going to happen because of this and that. And dealers were all pissing in their underwear about how that's going to happen. The manufacturer doesn't care about us. They're just going to eat our lunch, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a terrible mistake. See, the reason Ford, I think, is doing it is because their residuals are a disaster. So they got an ocean of vehicles that they need to remarket. So they need to get into the front end of that where they can increase X amount of return from whatever their lease residual was. They have to get a little bit more out of it. And in that regard, they become almost antagonistic with the dealer, where they don't want the dealer only to pick the good cars out of their lease returns and keep them and leave Ford with the ones that are upside down, thousands more. So in that, let's call it controversial or antagonistic dynamic, their only resolution, sitting on the 19th floor of the glass building, is to look for the alternative. Would it work? Well, it's possible it would work, but you're going to have some very, very pissed off dealers. You got to picture this for a second. There's a finite number of potential buyers. There isn't like a ship that lands from Mars, like the bus coming from Brooklyn to Route 1 on a Saturday morning, dropping off people, and they have no way home, but they got to buy a car, right? That's something that happened for decades. Busloads of people coming into a used car center, and the only way they're getting home is they got to buy something. So it like worked out. So there's only X number of potential buyers in the pool of potential buyers in the world, right? In the United States and Canada, right? So who's going to get to them? Well, if you're going to go upstream and grab a car that's coming off lease, and the manufacturer's going to pick up $1 on finance, or they're going to pick up, $1 on the difference between what they'd get remarketing it and what the customer's going to get. The great idea, the customer's going to get a great buy, and the manufacturer gets more. Who's to leave out of the picture? The dealer. Now, what are they going to do? Pay the dealer a $500 finder's fee for doing nothing, or for doing the service and the delivery? That's possible. That's not impossible. As long as they got a trade-in product that works perfectly and they have the ability to move those vehicles from point A to point B, I believe that's possible. It's going to remain like in question whether they can get all of their dealer body to buy into that. It's kind of like, believe it or not, and I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not a stretch at all, what Carvana is doing with dealer inventory. So, Carvana is selling from dealer inventory. They got them advertised on their website. It's a partner inventory, right? So if you happen to be sitting in Syracuse, New York, and you pick a car on Carvana's website that says partner inventory, you're buying that from a dealer that has sourced the car. Could have been a trade, could have bought it at an auction, put it through the shop, serviced the car. It's in a category of what they want to list at a price they'll list it for. So the dealer's carrying the carrying cost. They did the work. If something breaks after they deliver it, the dealer's going to service it. So from a Carvana standpoint, they become Amazon in that case, right? So Amazon's selling books. Now I'm not selling books. Now I'm selling shoes and pocketbooks. And basically what I was doing is advertising the shoes, pocketbook, and the source is happy to list it that way. And generally speaking, now you're worried about listing it to a price where you can actually sell it. So where Amazon just agnostically lists that stuff, Carvana is just agnostically listing cars that fit into a category that they then can sell with no cost of carrying. They pick up the VIG on finance. The dealer ain't getting no VIG finance there. Right? And now think about it. Ford be doing the exact same thing, ain't? So, in other words, Ford, in my estimation, if they were smart, would actually require the dealer that has the car that comes off lease to get it ready. And they will sell it off their website, just like Carvana. And when Fred Bean sells it, but actually it's on Pacifico's lot, it don't mean nothing, because what happened is it got grounded at Fred Bean's or grounded at Pacifico, but it's actually Fred Bean's that is going to do the delivery because that's closest to the customer, and they're going to. It could easily be a Carvana / Amazon-esque experience, more efficient distribution, better end case, theoretically better end as experience for the consumer, which of course that's what Amazon's model is, right? They couldn't care less about producer or anything in between. It's all about building the best experience for the end user. And that obviously has worked out really good. I mean, who in the world 5 years ago would believe you're buying everything online? Of course, COVID sped that up. But prior to COVID, everybody's buying everything online. There's nothing to talk about. And as soon as you push the button, about 10 seconds later, somebody's showing up, knocking at your door, bringing it to you. That's a better experience than just go park your car, walk around for half an hour, smoke a cigarette, go back in the store. It's not there. You can't find it. They'll have it. They'll order it from another store, and 2 years later, you'll get it. No, that's the different thing. In my estimation, this idea that Ford is playing with, General Motors played with 20 years ago, couldn't do it. Actually, before Dan Kennedy retired, that was his. We actually went to Detroit and sat with him because they saw us as the trade-in solution, and that never got off the ground, man. Dan Kennedy was remarketing manager of General Motors for decades, and he's in the Hall of Fame and all the rest of it, right? So he was going to go out on his shield of, I'll fix this at the end, and everybody's going to be happy, because obviously the sea of General Motors cars that lay around for 3 and 6 and 10 months at a time until they're ready to take the loss, that would have been the solution. They got a tremendous amount of cars, Impalas, Malibus, whatever, sitting around just letting the weeds grow through the tires, right? And they're going to retail them from that spot. So that theory on a whiteboard, holy Jesus Christ, is that a good theory? Try to make that work. You see, in other words, logistics becomes an amazing problem. So Carvana has basically solved that. Of course, obviously, Prime has solved that, right? So it's not unsolvable. You can solve that. It depends on, let's say, skill set, will, technology, capability, training, and all that. That don't fall out of the sky and land there in 2 seconds. Everybody's pissed off about Carvana. Carvana, they're losing money. Now, what they're doing is building I would call it a model that took tremendous brain skill, whatever. I know we all hate them, and hate us and everybody hates everybody, and now they're going to wholesale cars to you because of Manheim Express. I get all of that. Believe me when I tell you, I understand that perfectly. But what they're doing is blazing the ground, and in the process of blazing the ground, doing a half.com. In other words, they're actually finding dealers that 100% are willing and happy to allow their inventory to be merchandised by them so the dealer can get another scratch on the board. They didn't have to talk to the customer. They didn't do anything. They just found the car, traded it, and bought it at Southern Auto Auction, dragged it over here, put a tire on it, put the air conditioning thing up, it's all ready to go, shiny and so forth. They come with the truck, pick it up, and drop it off at the consumer's house. It's 3.5 miles away. It really theoretically was your customer. The only difference is Carvana advertised enough and created an experience that's friendly enough, in theory, friendly enough for the consumer that they don't become one of the 88% of consumers. When you look at their Yelp account, it'll Yelp you into like oblivion, because it's rare you find somebody who says, "Oh, this was the greatest thing that ever happened to me." No, I mean the negative reviews are unbelievable. Now, are they able to overcome that? I don't think there's any question they're going to overcome that, because as you keep getting bloody noses, you're going to find ways to duck or block or do something, right? And while that's occurring, and you have really smart people that work in these like OEMs. When we're saying OEMs, could be anybody that has large groups of cars, could be a huge dealer group, could be anybody. In other words, they're blazing the trail that absolutely everybody's going to follow. There's no question in my mind about that. Here's the best part of the story: all the way to wholesale. All the way to wholesale. All the way to wholesale. What we've been doing all of our lives for decades and decades, and oh, shit, I ain't never doing it that way. So you can say that, right? And then you can grab your dial-up phone, and it'll work. It'll work perfect. And you can find out that you can make your 6 calls for today on that phone, and you don't need no mobile phone. You don't need an iPhone. But truthfully, right, you're not going to bring your sibling or your son or daughter into your business and say, "We're not going to use those iPhones. We're not going to use what is now becoming pretty clearly obvious different ways to price, source, move, remarket your inventory." It ain't going to be that way. I think this year it's going to be kind of like the Al Gore curve, where Al Gore's global warming curve, where you got a flat line for 2.3 billion years, and then you get to 1900 and it starts moving up fast, and by the time you get to 2020, it looks like it's a rocket shot going straight to the moon, straight up in the air. How the whole thing's done. I think last year, I really thought 2020 was going to be something special. We'd be able to see better and understand things better and do things different. And then we got smashed in the back of the head with this thing. And I really thought, honestly, March the 16th, I really felt, honestly, that the car dealers were finished. Like, who's ever going to need a car again? For what reason? What would you need a car for? You're staying home. You walk, you do anything you want, but you ain't going to work, so what do you need a car for? Turned out to be something different. Everybody wants to chase out of the city, because who wants to live in a city? You got to be out of your mind living in a city. So everybody's buying cars, and everybody's making more profit than ever, because, there aren't any. If there aren't any, but that's the other thing I think manufacturers are going to figure out shortly. The fewer you make, the more money you make, because people pay for whatever you're selling, as opposed to having too many of them where everybody's got to sell to the bottom. You know about selling to the bottom, where you got to sell for less no matter what you got, because everybody has that tattooed right between their eyeballs. No. That ain't gonna. That's not the future. That's not the way it's working in the future. In other words, pricing is based and value is based on replacement value. If you can't replace it, you can't sell it for less. What, are you out of your mind? If you do that in volume, you're going to be out of business in 13 seconds. So as we move through this thing, with all these sucker punches on the way, big giant potholes you can fall in and disappear, and all the rest of it, right? All added into this, let's call it this stew of, I don't want to say, poop, but, this thing that keeps you constantly paying attention and, trying to create, solution and, pathways that make sense while you're navigating through this thing. Currencies changing, all the different things that are like constantly in motion, right? I think what we're going to see this year is a lot of things that are going to have a fundamental difference in how we're going to survive. You know what I mean? I think your point with Ford, Shawnee, I think they're serious about this. I think they got AutoFi involved in different things. Logistics is still a real issue. They could solve it. I think we got something that could solve it for them. To be perfectly frank with you, I think the simplest thing in the world. And once that network is built in a logistics platform, it makes what's impossible today totally possible. In fact, there's no reason on earth why it doesn't work cross-sectionally, not just for delivering cars, not just for appraising cars, not just for servicing cars, but for simultaneously doing dealer swaps. Now, dealer swaps won't look the same if they start selling out of a centralized inventory because the consumer wanted Pinkel purple dots, pinstriped green one. That unit's going to show up at their front door. You see, I think if they're smart, what they're going to wind up doing is every unit they sell, based on the regionality of the dealership is going to get a smidge. They'll get a nickel. They'll get a little piece of the action. Because now you shut the dealer's mouth up because he can't even say, you're digging into my dealers. You can't do that. No, you can, because if the manufacturer is not a pig, which is probably hard for it not to be, but if they're not, and you have a dealer that really is your service center and your representation and the nice cut lawn and the people are all dressed up nice and neat, safe, and all the rest of it, right? And logistics is actually taking place from there, picking them up, dropping them off, doing whatever you want to do to kiss the customer's ass, make an unbelievable, let's call it experience, which I believe could be way better than Carvana's experience, way better than Carvana's experience, because you really got I don't know, what is it, 3,600 locations, man, that they're all new and they look nice and they're clean and they got real shops in them and so forth. So if they did that and gave the dealer a little smidge, dealer, first of all, is happy to ground the lease cars. Cars are only going to get sold right from there. The cars that are unsold, I believe, are going to go into a marketplace and never leave the premises, because they're just going to go to another Ford dealer, or if it's a bad Carfax, too many miles, it's going to go to a sharecropper, and a sharecropper specializes in that car because that's what they do, and they'll be happy to pick them up from that location. I believe that's what we're going to see in this. I don't think it's going to be 2 years from now. I think it's going to happen this year. I do believe that wholeheartedly, especially if whoever blazes that trail, Carvana, CarMax did it first, right? But they didn't do it all the way. Now they're chasing, and they're still doing fabulous. The smartest buyers I've ever seen in my life. Overall, smartest buyers of all time. Smart means don't pay too much, can buy anything that's worth the money and no fear, and know what to do with them after you don't like them any longer. I got an auction that works like a charm, right? So Carvana coming along, they're doing a little bit differently, and dealers and dealer groups and manufacturers are watching. Do you really think that a dealer or a dealer group or a manufacturer sitting around sucking on a lollipop watching it happen ain't going to do nothing about it? It's a question of who's going to do it, how they're going to do it, and how it works for dealers best. If it don't work for dealers, right, like if it doesn't work for the manufacturer, right, it ain't going to work at all. If it don't work for dealers, right, manufacturers are never going to be able to do a Carvana deal without their dealerships. It ain't going to happen. They just got to be smart enough to include the dealer with a little tiny beak wetting every time a car gets sold. And now they can continue to say that we'll kiss your ass if you buy a car from us, and we'll kiss your ass for life, and we'll even do everything for you no matter what it is. And I think that will work. Does that make any sense to you, Shawnee, me boy?
Oh, it's fantastic. You hit on it with the 3,600 locations around North America. I mean, that alone, and that's what Amazon's realizing, is that they need you do need a bit of a bricks and mortar for all the extra stuff, the returns.
There's no question about it. Yeah. So they're buying malls. They're taking space in malls. Well, listen to me. There's not a Ford dealer in the country that I'm aware of that's a half-assed place. In other words, Ford dealers are they're kind of like Villanova graduates. You follow me? In other words, their places look good. They take pride in them. They're good. They're nice people. They're solid car dealers. That some of them 3, 4, 5 generations deep. You follow me? These aren't novices. You see what I'm saying to you? I think, in my estimation, which means absolutely nothing, obviously, I think Ford will be the next. I hate to use the word Carvana-esque, but Carvana-esque experience because they got everything that's necessary, including unlimited inventory that they don't know what to do with. See, you got to picture this now. A Ford dealer has trucks that show up out front and they unload cars, right? So they didn't have to go looking for them. They landed there. Truckloads, truckloads, truckloads. You even could say, I wanted a purple one. What thing? You can do that and they'll make it for you. It'll land there. So they don't have a sourcing issue that, let's say, a Carvana, a Vroom, or a CarMax does. They don't have to go chasing around looking for the cars. They're landing there. Next, they have a source of cars that's natural to them. They're coming back off lease. They're leasing more. Nobody buys a Lincoln. What in the world would you buy a Lincoln for? You out of your mind? You lease the Lincoln. That means the Lincoln's coming back. That means you have a natural source of cars coming to you, and you didn't have to be a genius figuring out what to do at an auction and all the rest of that shit, right? Now, if the manufacturer has enough brains, they make those cars attractive enough where the dealer can't say no when they come back in. If they got to subsidize them would mean they might retail that car to a consumer. That means the dealer didn't have to take it between the eyes like a sledgehammer between the eyes and get pissed off at the manufacturer trying to shove it up their rear end with the car that they don't want and all the rest of it. No, the manufacturer is smart enough to build a great car. They should also be smart enough, in my estimation, to be a great partner with the dealer. That's going to let you do all kinds of things with a dealer. If you do that, show a little bit of compassion to the dealership, to the owner of the dealer, and he'll kiss your ass in perpetuity. You're going to have the greatest partner in history of the world. There could be an exception here or there. I doubt it. What would that do to the value of the franchise? It's going to make your blue sky skyrocket. It ain't going to the same day. It ain't going to be like a Toyota dealership worth $27.2 million. It's not going to do that. But over a short period of time, if that model works, it could be more than that. It could be more than that. I think Ford could be Ford again, as opposed to being a stock that can't get past double digits. I think it could turn out to be, like mid double digits, because all they got to do is get past this little bit of we're worn out, our model sucks, our cars aren't any good, we're not even going to make cars no more, we're going to do this and we're going to build an electric that and all the rest of it, right? If they can get past that and do this model, keeping their dealers in mind without, making them feel like third-class citizens, I got a funny feeling it could work amazingly. That's my theory, Shawnee. Didn't know you were in for that beating today, did you?
No, that was fantastic, though. I have one more thing and I just want to catch it before I let you go. So does this new model give more weight? And do you think it'll give more weight to the value impacting options? Because if it's just one massive marketplace with the filters and you don't have lane departure or lane assist, you're eliminated, right? So if you're,
right,
you're appraising these cars, those value impacting options.
Shawnee, you got to picture this now. So I love the way you think, but we got to think a little bit broader. So now I got you in a narrow tunnel of what things are important, because that stuff really is important. They actually should become standard equipment, because for what it costs to put in a car, right? If rental car companies had a quarter of an understanding of the car business, there would be no more rental car equipment, because they'd add those two other options. And when it's all said and done, they get more. It was up front, $10 more, but they get $13 back in the back end because it got quad seating. Who in the world don't need quad seating? Who in the world would buy a car and a pallet without a moonroof and navigation? You have to be out of your mind, right? So if they added those couple little things, and because they added to every car, it's going to cost them less. They make a deal with the manufacturer. Every car is going to have this, and therefore it costs them less. But the net return when they come back out, it's worth more. So to your point, right, you got to picture a little broader. There is not one single category of buyer. There's credit rat buyers. There's people that don't care. They're practical buyers. Practical buyers don't care about a moonroof. They'll even buy a previous rental car because they teach history. They don't go racing on the weekends with cars and coffee. You understand? Or whatever they call those things, right? That's not what they're doing. But then there's another category of people. They wouldn't dream of owning a car unless it had these 18 options and 55-inch wheels, right? So inside of that, Shawnee, in other words, it's a question of having the capability of understanding the demographics of how many people don't care about this, and therefore you can do that, and how many people have to have this, and therefore you got to do that. So when you think about when a car's coming back off of lease, right, who your potential best end user is that you're going to target. It's really really simple. Supply and demand and demographics and all the rest of that thing. It's not even difficult. Sometimes it makes it look like it's difficult because nobody has really put it into practice correctly, if that makes sense. And once again, I'm not trying to pontificate about this. I'm just stating as an observer, as a student. I'm just observing what my eyeballs and my brain are telling me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bob. That's huge. Merry Christmas. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday.